everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting, another episode of the Indie Show. Tonight we're kicking off a new series. We're going to be talking Killadephia Volume 1, and there's only one person responsible for this being on my show, and oh my god. You're muted. You muted yourself.
Sorry, I was busy with doing something. What was it?
So, yeah,
I was just decorating.
Not Avengers. We're not talking about Avengers, John.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right. I thought maybe.
But congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I'm very glad that I broke you down eventually.
Well, this is literally you're like
you succumbed.
You should read Killadelphia. You should read Killadelphia. You should read Killadelphia. Have you read Killadelphia yet? You should read Killadelphia.
Yeah.
For like a year and a half plus. So.
It worked out with Fables really, really well. So I'm gonna keep doing
so
this.
I'm gonna we haven't talked about this yet.
No.
Are you nervous about how I'm going to react? What do you think? Like, I know, like,
no,
the
I'm not as nervous about this as I was Fables. I'm not as nervous. I have more confidence in this.
You have more confidence. Okay.
Correct.
Interesting. We'll see.
We'll see.
Next, we have another big fan of the series, Mr. Justin Logan Comics. What's going on, man?
JP's going to break John's heart tonight. I can feel it. Look, I am ready to break down. Oh, wait, I had the wrong book. I'm ready to break. Oh, wait, this is still the wrong book. I got my iPad. I'm ready, JP. I'm ready to talk some Killadelphia.
And last but not least, the only other person in the chat who had, in our conversation tonight, who had not read Killadelphia before this, Mr. Darryl, read your comics. What is going on?
Not a lot, guys. Ready to talk some vampire.
Ready to talk vampires. All right. Well, we're going to start with Darryl. I want to get his first impressions of, because he's the other one who hasn't read it. So before we let John and Justin bias your opinions,
this is where JP's like, please have the same opinion as me. Please have the same opinion as me.
You don't know what my opinion is, John.
I don't.
So, actually, before we start, Darryl, I need to shout out the chat. We got GT Key hanging out early.
All right.
Andy and also waiting patiently for us to show up, but we were, of course, still waiting. I should have said 9:30 Central from the beginning, but I should have known. But I thought maybe
good. I did pretty good.
You didn't do it. You did better than Justin would have. Yeah.
It's true.
TJ, of course you're waiting on them. Mark, welcome. And Crazy Guy, Comic Shock Too Crazy. What is up?
CGC.
Nice. All right, Darryl. What are your initial thoughts on Killadelphia?
I thought the concept of it was very interesting. I guess without getting too much into the spoiler of the story, I liked the twist of the head vampire a lot. Some story elements I felt were so rushed and pushed through, though. It took me out of elements of the book. But overall, I like the art in it. I like the concept of it. I would say I enjoyed it overall.
Okay. Nice. Justin, I know you posted today. You've read this 37 times at this point.
Yeah.
So I think we all know you're probably gonna say you like it, but what are your initial thoughts on this volume here?
I'm I cannot stand this book, guys. I was thinking back. I did like 2 or 3 other breakdowns, full breakdowns of the first 3 trades overall. So I'm man, I had some of my notes. I'm okay, look at this. I got some of my old notes, but I did go and reread it again. And I did enjoy it again as I have been. So to what Darryl mentioned, the artwork for me was the first thing that really caught my attention when I went through this the first time around. Jason Sean Alexander, which now anything he does, I'll buy, cover wise or any of his work that he does. So I just love his style. And then, like Darryl said, very interesting and unique, concept of a story. Never really been done in the way that they're combining some of the different elements that they are. I am also a huge Hamilton fan, which I know there's reference to that in this book, and actually even some things shared outside of this book that was inspired by that play, Hamilton. So overall, definitely a big fan of this series.
Okay, John, your first impressions. We know you posted just yesterday that your all-time favorite indie, and this is your current favorite indie that's ongoing. What about this? When you first started reading it, what about this first volume hooked you?
I think Justin definitely hit on some of the best stuff here for sure. I love American history. I think it's very interesting, and I know that the creator has a big interest in the aesthetic of Hamilton mixed with the genre of horror. I think that there's something interesting about that. The idea of the atrocities and horror of history coming back to haunt us. And I think there's something really kind of cool about that. The first time I read it, there's obviously a father-son story at the core that I kind of got into and thought was kind of interesting. But for me, it was more about the ways in which history and horror blend. And that happens, like Justin's saying, in the artwork of Jason Sean Alexander, who really does capture this sort of gothic, extreme, intense horror. And I think it comes across really, really well. And it's easily the best part of the book is the visual aesthetic that is created here. And it just jumps out at you. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I bought issue 1, cover A, when it first came out. It's slabbed in the bin here and I didn't have a chance to get it out. It's a beautiful cover. And since then, I've just been into a ton of the variants, a ton of the alternate covers that have come out. The artwork just really is top notch.
Okay. So you said you were not nervous about me reading this one compared to like Fables.
No.
I will say you probably should have been because I'm not a huge horror guy. Like horror for me, like I have very specific horror tastes. Like I'm not a huge horror guy. It takes I gotta have some humor mixed in. It's gotta like carry. It's gotta be more than just gore. Like right. I don't like that.
There's not a lot of humor in this.
There's no humor in this, but that doesn't mean there's not that. I would agree with Daryl. The concept is super intriguing to me. Like the way that they're telling the story is super intriguing to me. Although I actually thought, because I hadn't dug into it and just you talked about it and the whole who the main vampires are. I thought it was going to be a bit of a period piece. I didn't think it was like not set when they were alive, but not set clear modern, I guess.
Sure.
So I was a little surprised by that. I was a little taken back on the thing. I will agree, just in general terms, with Daryl in the fact that I felt like some of the story points, particularly the father-son thing, I felt were a little underdeveloped. That I would have liked a little more, because I felt like that's what they were trying to grab you with the story, is you needed to care about the father and son, and I don't think they quite got me there, at least in this volume. I don't know where it's going from here, but like in this volume, I felt like I didn't care enough about that relationship to really care, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I enjoyed it. I would agree the art is amazing in terms of like it just does a really good job of setting the tone, setting the like some of the horror stuff is a little like for me, like, okay, some of the gore gets a little up there, but it's not bad, but it fits really well with what they're doing and what the story is. So overall, I did enjoy it. So like, I won't go there, but there were a few things that helped me back from loving it the way that you and Justin apparently do. Like, I don't, I'm not, and we'll see if it maybe builds from here, but like, just initially it was like, there were some things that was like, I was a little disappointed in terms of just setting up some of the characters' motivations. Like, and we'll get into that as we get into the discussion. So, hey, Old Wolf.
He's already shaming Justin. Is this like when you tell women that they should smile more? It's not a good move. It's not a good move, Tony. I've learned never to say that.
Face, man.
All right, so let's dig into this. First issue, we see a son basically talking about that his father is dead, and I will admit, I had to reread these first couple pages, like after I read them the first time, because it was like I missed the 10 days earlier in the bottom corner. So I thought this was the son at first, like is the detective that we get on page 2 instead of like his dad. Because I missed that 10 days earlier, because it's not like there's no box.
And they dress similarly, the dad and the son. They have similar hairstyles.
Yeah, so I was a little confused right off the bat, so I had to go back like almost immediately. Like I figured it out quickly, but it did throw me. So
can I highlight a thing I've heard about for Rodney Barnes, the writer, and something I agree in general with him as his style? And it's part of what I think Alec and I tapped into when we discussed Blackula, which was a book these two creators did not too long ago. You can get a trade of. He does not slow down, and he expects you to read every word. So like he really there's because of that, you have problems of pacing sometimes where people are like, I want a moment to breathe, or I want a moment to get to know, to like sink in on these characters. I want moments of pause, but he doesn't do that. He's never going to do that. And I think it's part of, what made Blackula a little bit weaker, in my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, you highlight it here with that point. If you didn't catch 10 days later, if you were going, it could be easy to get confused visually between, wait, is that the father? Is that the son? And there are moments where you have that confusion occurring. And I think it's in part due to the breakneck speed of Rodney Barnes when he writes stories, that he packs in a ton. There's no wasted space. Like everything has to be there. And if you skip an issue of this book, you're lost.
Well, in this case, I actually blame the letter, because it says, like, it's just black letters 10 days earlier, like in the corner of that top box, and everything else is in a box or in a bubble, and it's like
I think that's the only time that happens.
Yeah, I just totally
it's because the boxes are usually narration. He uses the box, so and they'll change color as we get different narrators. And when you get later books, you'll have several narrators, and they'll all have their own colored boxes. Right. So whether you're hearing one character or another, the boxes are never used for a narrator. Like it's never Rodney Barnes speaking. It's always the characters who are telling their own story while you're seeing something else happen.
I will say that's the one drawback for me as I've read through these, and even going beyond the first volume, where I've gotten confused with, as John, as you're talking specifically about the different voices or different characters that are talking based on the colors of the boxes, which my first time through didn't really pick that up. Like, associate the red with this character or the blue with this character. So there were definitely times where I'm like, wait, who's talking here? I got to go back. So I definitely have kind of done, rereads of certain pages just to.
Well, and I think just like we've discussed with JP on his discussion of Something's Killing the Children, the idea of the reading across pages versus the reading down pages, the visual aesthetic for Something's Killing the Children is a little odd. It's the same with Killadelphia, where they have a very specific system, and it takes a while to get it down and to understand what they're trying to do and the function of it. And it can lead to a lot of rereading of pages, because you're trying to figure out, wait, what is he trying to say? Because there, again, everything matters.
It's not your typical
box.
Even the word bubbles have just this thin line that points to the character that's saying it, has a neat stylistic thing. But there were times that I was getting lost. Like, I would have to be like, wait, who's saying this? And there's the little line pointing. There are times like that definitely. But I like that they used all caps. I hate when they use lowercase letters in comics. Like, I just don't think it works great. But yeah, I definitely think that is the oddest spot for that 10 days. I don't recall that I missed it necessarily, but you pointed it out, and the fact that it's not highlighted in any way, it's easy to overlook. Yeah. I would agree.
It took me till basically like where he shows up at the other place, and I'm like, wait, is he old? Like, you see him later, and he's kind of got some gray, and I'm like, wait, is he older? I'm like,
yeah.
I was a little bit confused, because I was still thinking it was the original detective.
Yeah,
and
it skips between times, and it skips between detectives, and they're both murder detectives, so they're both covering similar scenes and things. Yeah.
And this first issue, I thought that because of that, the hopping around in time and the reading of the journal, so it was going back and forth, that to me was a little disjointed in this first issue. And like halfway through, I looked ahead, because I was like, is this going to be the whole thing? Is it going to be doing this the whole thing? But I think it only really does that in this one issue.
Because the end of the issue, like, and we'll jump ahead, is the end of the issue is he doesn't need to be reading Dad's journal anymore, because
surprise,
because he digs him up. But as we'll get into, it's a vampire story. So
I love that scene too, where Dad's like, took you long enough. Like,
it's great.
Because honestly, the ongoing drama between dad and son is the fact they can't speak to each other without digging into each other. It's hard for them to communicate, and it comes up time and again where you're going to see them just both with the same goal, but like just unable to overcome their issues.
Yep.
And I do feel like, so from right off the bat, he sets up on this very first page that the son, that they have a strained relationship, and they do briefly talk about it. And this for me is one of the weaknesses of this whole volume is, and sometimes, and I get it, like even sometimes people that have those kind of things don't really know why they're as strained as they are. And it talks about like when his mother died and like that was part of it. But I just feel like they spend a lot of time on them getting on each other's nerve, but they don't spend. I wish there was a little more time in this volume on why it, like the why for me, like because it was just like, because it felt like they had so much in common that it's like, okay, why? Like it felt a little forced in a way for me. Daryl, did you feel that, or because you were talking about like some of the stuff that you didn't feel like they had enough time on, or maybe that was not one of the things that you felt?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I agree that like it's like they spent this first issue kind of setting up the father-son dynamic like that, but then we don't really touch on it really much again, other than a few little, snips at each other until the very end. And yeah, that was one of the things. And then, I mean, a lot of it was all this relationship stuff with the father and the son. I felt was kind of oddly touched on or not fleshed out in this volume the way that it initially sets itself up. Like you feel like that's what the story is really going to be about. And the vampire stuff is going to be kind of like the backdrop in a similar way, like The Walking Dead is more about the human interactions and the setting is just the zombie apocalypse.
The first issue definitely gives you that feel. Like so that it's really going to be about them.
Yeah. And it gets away from that, which is fine because I like the other stuff too. But then we also meet the coroner lady.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, as we go along, there's another relationship there that just happens like super fast and to me felt very tacked on and like kind of a weird way.
Yeah.
As that developed.
That was another thing that it was like, where did this come from? Like when they turned to that page, I didn't feel like that was set up to that point. But that's just me. But let's dig in a little bit deeper into this first. So the first issue is really about, we see that we get the flashback on those first couple pages where I was confused. The father was working on a murder case and he appears to get set up and killed. And you don't know, there's just a bunch of people there when he dies and you're not 100% sure exactly what's going on. And the son who he's estranged from comes to town to like deal with his stuff, and he finds his journal and he finds this, and he starts down this road because it's kind of his like last little F you to the old man. I'm going to solve the case you couldn't, and so that leads him to the coroner and leads to this whole thing that the old man was investigating vampires. And he's like, what? And ultimately to his realization that, there are vampires, and this great scene where he digs up his dad and his dad is now a vampire. So first issue, what stands out to you, Justin? I'll let you go here. What stands out to you about this whole issue?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely like the mystery style or detective style of this issue, as he kind of picks up where his dad left off. Although as he's reading that the little red book, like he's like, all right, my dad was clearly off his rocker at this point in his life. Like I like that he was like really not buying any of this stuff, which I mean, totally understandable. But as the clues started to come together, and he's starting putting everything together like that, and comes across as, you show that end piece there. I like how I feel like that was done really well. Going back to what you were saying before about the father-son relationship, like not really feeling like you got that. I feel like I didn't need to know the why, or at least not. I guess I just didn't get that feeling of needing to know the why per se, just nor understanding that there was this friction.
Right.
And I know they did drop like subtle hints, and as Daryl said, like they do get to it more so, towards the end of the book, ultimately. But yeah, I think that I was still just drawn into the two characters and just seeing kind of where it goes from here, based on just the main setting of them, knowing that they had issues. But yeah, overall, like I like that this was, like I said, detective style, but it was a detective style where the storytelling is done by the flashback, the dad's steps, you know, as he's typing this out, the son and everything else. So yeah, that's where I mean, I was definitely drawn in. I will say this first issue out of the 6 issues was the one that I had to reread a couple of times. Like even when I first was getting into this book, I actually remember reading the first issue, and then not even going into the second issue, but going back and reading the first one fully again, like in that one sitting, just because I just felt like I didn't grab everything that was gone, and maybe partially due to some of the things we talked about in the very beginning of you know, who was saying what and when it was happening, things like that. But once I kind of started to sink my teeth into it, see what I did there, I started to like it a little more. So,
Okay. John, what about you? What stands out in this first issue?
I mean, yeah, it's a father-son dynamic, and I think there is, to maybe your point, there's a cliche to it. There's not a ton of like originality to it, but I
maybe
think
that's it. Maybe it's not the why. Maybe it was just I felt like it was just something that was
you've seen it before.
It was very generic,
and I think that I can understand why he didn't necessarily feel like he wanted to break a ton of new ground with the two of them. Is that the rest of the comic, the history and the vampires and all of these things, he's treading a bunch of new grounds. And I think he probably wanted something very familiar to anchor what was going on, something that wasn't terribly complex, a father-son dynamic built on a child trying to get validation from a dad who was way too busy all the time and never had time for him. Like, it's just a basic thing, right? It's a very common thing. Dad works all the time. The kid wants the validation of, didn't I do a good job, Dad? Didn't necessarily get it. And now it's trying to get it in afterlife with Dad. You know, it's and so sometimes it can feel like there's not a ton of juice there. See what I did there? But instead, I think for me, it just grounded it for me in a reality of like, yeah, that's a very common father-son difficulty. It's very, very normal. And the humor in the series always comes from the two of them, and the bickering and the little fest is there. It's not a lot, but it's where you're going to get some of that stuff. And then issue 1 and 2, and certainly issue 2, when you see them like chatting around the doing shooters of blood, like that's when you really get it, you know?
Yeah. And I will say, I think you hit the nail on the head for me. Is it wasn't necessarily that I needed to know the why. It just felt too generic and cookie cutter. Like, oh, I've seen this a million times, so why is this different or new or important? And I didn't get that. I think you actually hit on it in a way that I didn't really think about it. Daryl, anything in this first issue that you want to chat about before we move along?
I want to real quick. We'll touch on the lettering again, the journal pages in that cursive writing. Makes me,
it's tough.
It's tough. It's hard. That's what makes me go back and reread again.
Yeah, that's fair.
Over again.
You're not alone.
But other than that, looking through it, I just realized they introduced the character that I didn't remember being introduced later on when that character shows back up. It's this. What's his name? Is it Tev or
Tevin?
Tevin. Oh, yeah.
But also Seesaw or whatever.
Yep.
Yes, that confuses me later on when we get to that. It's like when somebody else mentions it was Seesaw, I'm like, well, who is Seesaw? You know? But so looking back, like, because I read this first issue, and then it was a few nights before I read the second issue, and I think the second issue maybe starts out with him. Is that right?
Yeah. Starts out with his grandmother. Yeah.
Yeah, that part. So I'd forgotten or just didn't notice that he was introduced in the first issue.
Yeah. Well, he's introduced sort of. It's just like chasing the sun.
He's just kind of there.
Yeah, he's just there. Yeah.
Well, and Dad is trying to catch him. Dad thinks he's part of this murder he's investigating, so he's looking for Tevin, and then that's what leads to his death.
Yeah.
Right.
So second issue is really like he digs Dad up. He's a vampire. They bring the coroner in, and we get the scene with Seesaw and his grandmother. So you're getting some of his motivation, but you get a lot of exposition dumps of what Dad just knows because now he's a vampire. he just knows a lot of this because now he's a vampire. But we get to meet some of our vampires. We get to meet Tevin, Seesaw in more detail. We get to meet
Brittany.
Oh, Brittany, yeah.
We get to, and then we get our reveal of our big bad. Yes. John Adams.
Yeah. I thought it was JP or TJ. Is it not? Am I wrong?
Actually, it does kind of.
Is that TJ the Slab Dragon Watson?
I love it.
Look a lot like TJ in the suit, in the
looking as slick and boss as can be.
Yeah.
If he has a whole set of comics in the background.
Yeah,
Yes.
if those were slabs instead of people, that would
right. There's TJ looking all boss.
Yeah, for sure. He does definitely have like. So yeah, we get a little bit of the history here of, and we see that Tevin and there's a little conflict there right off the bat between him and Adams, who's clearly the leader of this. I don't know, what do you call a group of vampires? Is it
It's not a coven, right? I don't know.
Not a coven. That's witches. I don't know.
A brood.
A brood.
What do you call it? Or a horde, maybe? Like a horde?
Or, yeah, maybe. But we see, and so we see that, and then we see them going to the morgue to try to eliminate any more vampires. But we get this, and we get a great splash page at the end of this of Tevin after his grandmother dies.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Just a fantastic page there.
Yep.
So what in the second issue jumps out at you? We'll let you go first, John, as we kind of ran.
Across the whole series, Tevin is consistently one of my favorite characters, if not the number one. I do like some of the female characters we're going to get here in a little bit, one in particular, but he is a great. So a lot of the story is going to be characters battling one another, and Tevin is he's the middle ground. He's somewhere in the center between this whole thing. He's got his own gripes, he's got his own frustrations, and he is. Ultimately, when you're talking about a story that has to do with our white founding fathers and the history of slavery, and you've got the modern situation we find ourselves in, Tevin is the child of that flaw in our history, right? And the things he's suffering are related and connected to these things. So getting a character who is able to confront a founding father with these, it's a wonderful what if right? It's a wonderful moment in horror what if to give him the opportunity to question the founders of our nation. And I think that's the core of kind of what I think Rodney Barnes is trying to do, is to create a social experiment where we could ask founding fathers questions about where these things have led, and look at that. The real horror here is not the bloody vampires, right? It's slavery at the center of this whole thing. And I think Tevin is this wonderful example of somebody who feels wronged and can't put a finger on who's wronged him. Right. Yeah, has his ancestors wronged him, has society wronged him, or has an individual in his life wronged him. He's just feeling wrong. He's got a lot of anger, and some of it justified, some of it not. And it's a very human condition to find him in. So this issue for me is Tevin is the core of what's going on here.
So the one thing I will say about that is, because it feels like here, like in this conversation and through the book, the flaw with Tevin is I do feel like his voice is a little inconsistent for me.
How so?
Because here he's very much like when basically they have some prisoners and they're having them feed, and he's like, his conversations with Adams, he's like, "Are you all right?" And he's like, "Done my part. Y'all have your show." He's like, "You don't approve." Adams is like, "You don't approve." And he's like, "Food or death? That shit ain't very presidential." He's like, "If they were to run wild existing just to feed, there'd be chaos." And he's like, "They'd be free." So it's like he doesn't want any control over it. But later, it's almost like he doesn't want vampires at all. I feel like as we get into this, like where he actually stands for me was a little confusing on, like, is he just wanting, because this comes off early on as he just wants chaos. And there's a couple other moments where he seems like that's what he wants. But then at other times, it's like, no, that's not what I want.
But isn't that the core of the challenge of freedom in general? Isn't pure freedom chaos? Isn't like
Yeah.
absolute freedom chaos, right? Where I can go into somebody's house and just take whatever I want. That's my freedom is what matters, right? I can do whatever I want. And I think that there's that's at the core. Humanity needs governance, but governance isn't freedom. Now it's control, right? And I think Tevin is caught in the middle of like what is reality and for him, right? It's like being mad at the world but having no one to put a face on, just being frustrated but being mad at the world, you know.
So Daryl, what did you think about this with Tevin and Adams and our introduction here?
I was this particular issue. I mean, it's setting up Tevin and the stuff with the grandmother at first. You know, you see him as like, oh, he's being sympathetic. He wants to like kind of help. He loves his grandmother. You know, it's always a good trait in somebody, right? And then, yeah, you don't really know why he's being like kind of antagonistic with Adams. Right. Now, back to this just real quick. When this page dropped, because at this point because in the first issue it mentioned John Adams.
Yeah.
Right.
It mentioned John Adams and stuff. And so you're ready to see him. And when they show you this, you were like, whoa, that is a suave looking John Adams. That's not the fat MF that Hamilton talks about.
No powdered wigs.
Yeah. Which later we see that cool dynamic of him evolving. But like, you weren't ready for that. It kind of like, I could see like, that page is cool.
Such a good page.
I was like, vampires can lose weight. I didn't know that.
It's called a dye it.
But I don't know. I just thought that was cool. And I like the whole idea of John Adams and these vampires dating back to, you know, the founding fathers. And it's probably the most irrelevant of the founding fathers, really. Like when, you know, in the grand scheme of history, he kind of is overlooked a lot, even though he's the second president. So I thought that was I loved that twist. So that really got me like, ooh, I'm enjoying this so far. The Tevin stuff in this issue didn't take to me. You just saw like, okay, something's going to happen there with him. But nothing there was standing out to me as like drawing me to that character in this particular issue, other than the very beginning with his grandmother.
Yeah.
This issue I left feeling like, you know, the John Adams stuff I really liked, and then of course the morgue scene that we're coming up on in a second too.
Yeah, which is right at the end or start of the next issue or whatever. Justin, anything in issue 2? Our true introduction to Tevin, our introduction to John Adams.
Yeah.
The conversation between father and son. Anything in there that jumps out at you?
So, John, I think I totally agree with everything you said. I feel like that's a lot of what I want to say about this series, and in particular this issue. What you covered. One thing to add, and I know Daryl, you're mentioning like kind of questioning like, you know, where Tevin stood towards the end of this issue. You know, what is he trying to do? I feel like at the core of what Adams is trying to do, it's really just the highlight of him being like, I guess, I don't know if the word, if it's hypocritical or what it is, that he basically wants to run the world his way. And Tevin basically just as John said, Tevin doesn't know what is right per se yet. Or, you know, but he knows what's wrong. And he also knows that basically what this guy wants is not the right thing. And that's just kind of repeating the cycle of what everything is to be right now. So I feel like that's really more where Tevin has stepped in to say, I'm not with it with this guy. Like, I also don't know the right answer, but I don't think this guy and his idea is the right move or the right direction. And so that I think is ultimately what he's standing up against when it comes to just Adams and his general idea of what he wants to do with the world. That's kind of how I looked at it more so. You know, I know we get deeper into things later, but the other thing I wanted to highlight was I just love the scene of like Brittany walking down the street, this creepy cop coming up. Like that was a heavy scene. It's a heavy scene, and then leading to what it led to. You know, and this guy begging for his life, hanging, you know, up on a pole and everything else. Like that it's just that, like, to me, that's like it's obviously super dark, but dark in a different horror way. Like it not just a boo, scary dark, but very on many levels. And so again, just part of why this book's heavy read
for sure.
Yeah.
So issue 3 is we get most of issue 3 is we get John Adams' history, how this came to be. Is a big chunk of this. We also get the end, kind of the morgue fight scene with the father and son. I forget what is their last name.
Sanderson. Oh crap.
Anyway, the father and son, but we also get
Sangers.
Sangster. Yeah, there you go. And so most of the issue is dedicated to kind of we getting the history of Adams. We get the father like going back to where he was turned into a vampire and how the vampires just ignore him because he's one of them now. Like we see Tevin and a group of other vampires that were also kind of lieutenants for Adams here. We get a little bit of that, and then we meet. Well, I think it's probably John's other favorite character, who is not. If you want to say Adams doesn't look like what you expected, Abigail does not look like what history says she is. And I love how she's a lady of the night, like completely in terms of she's running a whorehouse. It's really what she's doing, in addition to being a vampire, where they're turning the clients into vampires or whatever, but like not exactly what you were expecting from Abigail Adams. I'm going to let Daryl go first for this chapter. What did you think of the history here and our first meeting of Abigail?
Well, before we get there, let's talk about John for just a second. Yeah. Other than his getting fit montage. So this should explain, I feel like, what Adams.
TJ. You mean TJ?
Okay, and the art right there, that particular page too, it's reminding me of Alex Molive that did the Daredevil run years ago. That particular shot really reminds me of his work. Anyway, this should be reveal more about what exactly it is Adams wants to do and why he's waited 200 plus years to do it.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, it's like as interesting as I thought it was. I thought the plan to come out now at this point in time was never quite clear. Like, why did you wait so long to execute this idea? Did it say something like he was waiting to see what the other presidents were going to do along the way? It's like there was a civil war. He sat out that.
For me,
and it even said, before you go, John, it even says at one point like that they went back into their crypt for a while, and they would be like they would just stay out of things for a while. It's like, yeah, that was not well explained. What his end goal / why now versus what he's been waiting for. So go ahead, John. Maybe you have something else.
For me, well, partly the history of John Adams as a president was an absolute cluster. Like the guy just blew it, and he just couldn't succeed and couldn't get things done. And he makes the comment, "I stood in the shadow of George Washington and was a successful vice president in many ways, but really could not succeed as a president." And then for me, it's this whole section, and ultimately John Adams as a character in this book is a man with an ego, an ego that is so bruised and so fragile. He wanted to stand back and see if the American experiment would be a success, and he slunk away. And then he watched Hamilton. He went to the theater and he saw how America is remembering him, and his ego wouldn't let it go. His ego basically said, "I need to prove to the world that I knew what I was doing and that I could do it." And he comes out of the shadows to basically be like, "I will not be remembered this way."
So you feel like seeing the Hamilton play was the catalyst for him to execute his 200-year-old
I
plan.
hadn't thought about it, but that is so
Yes.
funny.
Okay,
It's so
I buy
petty.
it.
It's so petty. It is so petty.
I didn't really register that.
He trusted so long that he would be remembered for what he contributed to our birth of our nation. And when he sees the fact that he's not even in, by the way, for those of you who've seen Hamilton, he's not even in it. You don't see Adams in it.
He's
You
just
just hear
mentioning
his voice and
his name,
and it's a punchline.
Yeah.
He
And
doesn't have a real job anyway.
Yeah.
and it's all done as like a mockery of his presidency, of his contribution to our history. And it's
This scene here.
you literally see John Adams go to see a play about the founding of our nation and come away saying, I can't believe that this was how I will be remembered. Is laughter. And it's, he's walking away from the theater, right?
Yep. He says laughter multiple times too.
I think the journey of him is certainly in this first hardcover is someone who is just so fragile, has such an ego and is so fragile. You're going to watch him get strung up by his own need to prove himself, So that's ultimately how I viewed him. And he comes across as the story progresses, you'll get more of it, but he comes across as just being wonderfully indecisive like he was as a president and being unable to balance the things in the world that he was struggling to deal with.
Yeah.
So what exactly is his goal here? Just to take over with vampires?
I think to prove that he could run the nation best, if he had ultimate control, he could do it better.
Yeah.
Okay. I like the idea that you've presented here, that the Hamilton
play was the whole catalyst. I did not.
That was the trigger. That's what triggered him. But I was still just kind of like, so what is his ultimate goal with the?
I mean, that's a better question, because he doesn't specify it, right? He doesn't say like, this is my goal. It's more that like, I can do it better. There's no like, it's kind of like the politician who says that's a horrible thing and that's horrible and that's horrible, but doesn't present an alternative, doesn't present the like, oh, what we need to do is this, because they know that an idea is easy to shoot down. It's easier. You win more points by crapping on everybody else's ideas than you do by presenting and pushing something substantive of your own, because you'd have to stand by it and explain it and validate it, right? Modern politics, right? And so I think he's in that category. He still hasn't learned anything from 200 years on the planet. The whole joke for me of Adams is he has not learned or evolved in any way. And you see his wife has, to the extent where I was in love with you at one time. I appreciated you at one time, but I've grown in a world that now accepts women of power and women can make choices, and you haven't. She's outgrown him.
Yeah.
Because she's evolved like the country and he hasn't.
And that's an ego bruise too.
No. Well, I mean, the ego bruise of, he even mentions like, my son was 2 terms, He's like,
yeah, 2. He says it like
so
twice,
petty, right? He's so petty.
And he lets his son die. He's like, I'm not gonna
have turned him.
We could have done great things, but he was like, no, because he lets him die because he doesn't want him to be better. Yeah.
All ego.
Okay, no, that makes more sense. I didn't really register it quite that way, especially with the play. But now that you say that does make it. Yeah.
Well, I think ultimately all these characters are flawed, right? None of these characters are the shining hero in this. Even the vampire. But at the same time, other than maybe my female favorite character, not a lot of characters are like horribly vile evil either. There's generally a lot of gray here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting. They're all incredibly human, incredibly flawed, incredibly petty in some ways, and unable to get over their own psychological BS. They're unable to get through. It's so rare in the Rodney Barnes universe here for the characters can actually grow past their baggage.
Yeah. All right. So what about Abigail? We talked about John. What about Abigail here, Daryl? Let me go back to this.
Okay. So back to Abigail. It was quite the shock to see her too, in the same way it was to see John Adams.
Look at the outfit that she's introduced in.
Yeah. And if you think about if you do know a little bit about John Adams and Abigail Adams, they were kind of known as like, this couple that she was pretty influential to him, more so than like, who Martha Washington was, and Thomas Jefferson. Well, I guess his wife died well before his presidency, but it's like you hear about Abigail Adams and like the letters they wrote to each other and like all this stuff. So this transformation of her is pretty like, okay, wow, they are taking this in a different direction. Not only did you not see John Adams show up with like a powdered wig on and stuff, but because that's what I was expecting to happen when it was first mentioned. So when he showed up looking like Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad or something, I don't know what I was expecting to see from her, but it wasn't this either.
Well, yeah, like he shows up and he looks like a businessman in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
like he's a suit, more modern. And he's maybe a kind of shady businessman in some ways, but like
shady car salesman.
But like you expected her to show up and looking like a woman of society or something still, and no, she's like
the Black Queen of the Hellfire Club.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say her outfit was like tonight's episode.
The Red Queen of the Hellfire Club. There you go.
Yeah. Right hand. Yeah.
So yeah, she's definitely different. What about you, Justin? What did you think of our introduction to Abigail here?
Yeah, I love her. I mean, she's badass. She's the boss. I feel like you could tell. It really is like the Sebastian Shaw stuff, like the club, as you see this whole room that she introduces. But I do feel like right away we get that vibe that she runs the show. Even if she isn't the front, as being behind John Adams, or John Adams having his own plan or whatever. I just feel like we got that vibe right away. So, but yeah, also just again, the art's so stunning in some of these scenes here. Even like just this close up of her face in the red the red room, I guess as you say. The details throughout this whole time, and I won't go to some of these other pages, but just the details. That they have on the close-ups of the faces and stuff are really well done here. Again, completely won me over.
Did we mention page is a bit of like
I was gonna say I won't throw that one out. Did we mention Toppy yet? I was he was another one I was like very curious about as I first got into this this introduction to this character. He seemed like a very loyal right-hand man to John Adams and all his beliefs, and I think we get a little understanding of his background he says, I've been on his side since the Great War. So clearly he's, seems like he's military of some sort. He has that type of mind. He's a fighter. He's aggressive. And he kind of goes toe to toe with Tevin here briefly. We get at least in this issue, we get a little bit of a hint, but I like how they kind of all, they're like a gang, or this group here that's hanging out. Oh, and I forgot, JP, you showed this page earlier, but man, this is so great. Like I love the walkthrough,
the clock at the bottom,
and just showing the clothes changing, just representing the time in a bunch of different ways, while also referring to some interesting angles of how the world worked throughout this time period. And even going as far as showing Obama and Trump at the end here on the far right hand side. So I know that throughout this whole series, there are definitely parts where Rodney Barnes keeps this very much relevant to today's society and things that are currently going on in the world. So
without being too like one-sided about anything too, because this could easily
agreed.
This could easily take a very political tone. Where it's like it's touching on politics, but it's doing it in a way that's
like an outsider almost.
It's not so like taking sides, so to speak.
Sure.
Which I don't really care if something does take sides necessarily, but
right.
That can be a distraction in the story depending on it. But it doesn't, and it very easily could if it so chose.
Yep.
So the other thing is the last page of this issue is we get so during the issue, Dad goes back to like where he was formed and sees all the vampires, and he comes home and he's like, someone else will stop him. I can let it go out right here. He almost lets himself be burnt. Like,
Can the dead commit suicide?
yeah,
You know, like
And-
that's basically it.
but ultimately he can't let it go. It's a
Right.
the case itself more than not his son. It's
Right.
the case that like he can't let go and can't like just not be, you know, turn into a vampire. So I thought that was a good moment for him in that issue that was important.
Yeah, and I like the just some of the copy at the end there. I mean, even just him dropping the F-bomb as he's so like stubborn and he's just like you know, like, all right, you know, gonna go back, you know,
Yeah.
do this thing.
I thought it was funny too when he's drawn toward, you know, the coven or the brood or whatever. And when he goes there and they're just like walking around nude to go to their like sleeping place, and they're like, "What's up?" And he's like, you know?
Yeah.
And then he looks at them all. They all go up to like, I guess, hang upside down. But he's like, I can't do this yet. Like
He crouches into the corner.
Then he goes out to like, I guess after seeing that and be like, this is what I'm becoming. Like I should just let myself burn up. But then he's like, no, I can't yet. So
yeah.
One of the things I wanted to mention, I know it's nice that you guys are so well read on history, and Daryl hit it on the head with the relationship between John and Abigail in real history. You know, she was one of the women that helped promote and pioneer vaccines. She ran their family businesses while John was away, which he was most of his life. So she ran their farms, she ran his businesses. She helped him write significant pieces of legislation or legal briefs. Incredibly well read, incredibly intelligent woman, and lived in a time when she wasn't allowed to contribute. She, you know, she couldn't do any of these things, right? She couldn't go to the Capitol. She couldn't, you know, participate in these things except remotely through this man who was her caregiver. Now, I think they don't ignore that in a bit of history, but what they do is show that as 200 years go by, she's changed, right? 200 years have gone by, and Abigail has gained all the freedoms that she wished she could have had at the start of our nation. And John still expects the subservient woman that he basically was able to stand on her shoulders, and she expects the chance to stand on her own. And I think that's the like crux, I think, of their dynamic 200 years later in history.
Yeah. All right.
And why I think she's freaking awesome.
So yeah, we're like 50 minutes in and we're just out of issue 4. So we're gonna be page.
That's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
No, you guys are good.
There's a ton of meat on the bone without getting too like metaphorical.
Yeah.
So issue 4, we see a little bit. We see the attacks have begun. Like Adam's plan is starting to come together. That like, and he sees he has the mayor on board, and we get the big part of issue 4 is really a couple of conversations. It's Tevin and Sangster Senior.
Yep.
And then we get Adams like kind of laying out some stuff with the mayor, but then we also get Josie and Junior, and this was the one that like what?
yeah.
like I turned that page. So what jumps out at you guys about issue 4? I'll let Justin go first this time. What about this issue? Because I felt like this was both. It felt like a shorter issue in a lot of ways, but really to me the big things were Tevin and. But what jumped out at you in this one, Justin?
Yeah, trying to go through. So yeah, I mean, first of all, the attacks were amazing. Love any of these like slashes that were drawn out. I thought the effects to that looked awesome. We get to see Toppy and some of the gang there approach this where they at the police station there. You know, would you want to make a report or whatever? And he's like, yeah, report a death, and he kills him. I thought that was awesome. Yeah, and then just seeing some of the buildup, I guess, between who was it? I think
Tevin and Sangster, or
Oh yeah. Well, one is this where he like expresses that he needs to eat? Did we get to that
Yes.
point yet?
Yeah.
James Senior has to like eat rats.
Yeah.
Yes. And I love how he tries to explain like whatever it was, the cartoon, and they're the Bugs Bunny and whoever's like trapped, and they start to picture fruit or food or whatever. He's like,
Yeah.
he's like, you're looking really tasty right now, like just referencing some of that stuff. Yeah, I'm trying,
Reader.
yeah, and then obviously, yeah, the kiss, which I don't know. I do feel like as things started to go on and they were getting closer with learning a little bit more about each other's history, the two of them, and especially some of the dramatic stuff that both of them have gone through, getting to know those characters, I did feel like they were getting closer. I don't know if to get the kiss yet or not, but I mean, I thought the panel itself was like gorgeous. I love how they do like the knockout white, and just have it focus on them.
It just felt rushed to me. Like it didn't feel like
fair.
Yeah, that it was earned just yet. But that was just me. But yeah,
it felt like a bad movie, like in a horror. I mean, I guess like in a horror movie, like a bad oh, we're in this stressful time. We only have each other. Let's take this moment.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I guess neither one of them is. Depending on how far the kiss went, maybe neither one of them can survive the horror movie now. John, what about you? What jumps out at you about this issue?
I mean, certainly it's Tevin. Like I think he's trying to express a philosophy, but it's a very juvenile, very naive philosophy of the world. And I think on the other side, you got Sangster Senior, who is so set in his ways. He even freely admits that as a cop, he would look at kids like Tevin as the enemy.
Yeah.
Right. And it just freely admits it. He doesn't. His bullshit meter is gone. Right. He's just like,
he doesn't care.
What do I care? I'm a freaking vampire. Like it doesn't matter. Like I can't even walk in daylight. What do I care telling you the truth of how I feel about you? And at the same time, Tevin is trying to express that like he's caught in the middle. Right. He's stuck in the middle, of what he was before and what he was promised as what he would have when he became a vampire. And I think he's feeling some of that remorse for the decision he made, yet at the same time feeling like, hey, how do I walk this middle ground? How do I find this middle ground when I was promised I would feel better about all the losses in my life and that I would have this place in the world? He's also feeling like, yeah, I don't know that it worked out exactly as I was pitched on this. Like you make a deal with the devil, this is what you get. And he's definitely got a lot of frustrations with what John Adams's plan looks like.
Yeah.
One thing I like about the art too is the coloring with the eyes.
Yeah.
They find like the perfect times to like highlight the pop of yellow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Even these, like with Josie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean,
just like the close-ups that he does.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually like the same drawing as this one here, but just like zoomed out or zoomed in.
The coloring is it the same? Does the artist do the coloring?
I don't know.
As well,
no. There's another. Yeah, there's
Louise NCT.
Yeah, I knew it was like a 3-letter.
Yeah, but the coloring is good and it's
like
consistent.
So great,
and they know when to like, hit the highlights or keep it dark.
Yeah,
it works really well.
I will say I love the last 2 pages of this where Adams is walking through all the vampires feeding on people, and he's like, his whole Abigail learned that my way is best, and one heart will stop and then restart. They will know John Adams was mankind's savior, as he's literally butchering mankind and turning them into vampires.
Yeah, they're all going to be dead by the time.
And he's standing in the sunrise, like melting away, like burning. You can see the the steam coming off of him as he's trying to watch a sunrise.
Yeah. So that was it. So anything else in this issue you guys want to mention before we move along?
No.
Okay.
This one.
So issue 5, we get someone posting a missing poster for Brittany to start it out. And we're going to get that in a minute. But then we get, the next day. So their first night of attacks. And then the next day. And the mayor is just like, yeah, it's no big deal. Everything's fine.
Yeah, I like the cover up of
It's
like
terrorist.
it's a terrorist attack.
Terrorist, yeah.
Terrorist, yeah.
Oh, I love this. I did love this page.
Yes.
Oh,
That
yeah.
spread
Good.
page.
Yep. Angels and
Phenomenal.
demons right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like being torn. It's like that shows that he's neither alive nor dead.
Mhm.
He can't be pulled in either direction.
Yeah.
I thought that's just a great page.
Well, and I think it points to the reality that like being human doesn't make you the good guy, and being a vampire doesn't make you the bad guy. It's really who you are in the inside, and there's a lot of that going on either side of this story, right? There are humans in this story that are not quality, and there are vampires that are actually decent people. And it's like everybody's just carrying their baggage, man. There's a ton of emotional baggage here.
Yeah.
So this issue kind of lays out, we get kind of the aftermath of the first night of attacks, but the things we get, you get that you're getting the dichotomy of what he's dealing with being a vampire, like that how you can go all dark or not. But we get Tevin's big reveal that he has the book and he's figured out how to use it.
Mhm.
The book.
The book.
He's a sorcerer.
Just the book is what it's called. So the other thing that we get focused on here is we get a little bit of Brittany's backstory, and we see that Tevin has the ability to make you not a vampire anymore.
Yeah, this was huge.
Because her sister has decided, I don't want to be, after 100 and some odd years, doesn't want to be a vampire anymore. And Brittany is not ready to go down that road.
Yeah.
We see her just go on
Like her crying blood.
Tears. Crying blood, but just go on a rampage of,
Mhm.
yeah.
When she wants her to like turn back.
So what jumped out at you about this issue? I don't know whose turn it is. Daryl, anything jumped out at you about issue 5?
Well, this whole thing with the book, I felt like kind of came out of nowhere, at least with the mystical aspect of it.
Right.
Like, I guess they mentioned it in the John Adams history part.
Yeah.
But not that it was going to have like magic spells and stuff. And I mean, I guess he didn't know that it had these magic spells, but as soon as Tevin's like holding his hand up and there's these globes of light, and I was like, okay, is this happening? Or because then it goes into kind of a flashback, or no, it just goes to the next, it leaves the scene. But because we had been having a flashback of him, I was like, so are these strobes of light just like, are they there? Like, is he casting some spell? It took me a minute. Or is this some kind of like reference to like this time stuff? But then you get to the next page where he's doing this craziness, like Doctor
Whatever
Strange,
that
or
is,
something,
Mhm.
you know, and that, and then they also where they call him Seesaw. And is this the first time they call him Seesaw?
No, they called him Seesaw earlier, but it's
It's scattered throughout. Yeah.
Okay, see, this is the first time I noticed it, and I was like, "Who is Seesaw?"
Yeah.
So that confused me.
The
But,
first issue, he technically references him, I think.
Oh, he calls him Seesaw
When he's
there?
calling, when he's on the phone with him.
Yeah, when
Wow.
he set him up originally to turn him into a vampire was
Yeah.
He called him Seesaw then. Okay,
Mhm.
see, I guess I either forgot it or just didn't pick up on them being. the
Or it's
same
just a very
character.
dense read, and there's a lot to take in, and it's easy to
Initially.
miss stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know?
So when these girls are like Seesaw, turned me back, and I was like, "Well, who is Seesaw?" And then I was like, "Oh, it must be Tev because he's got this book that he's deciphered." So it's like this issue had a lot of like, I guess, explaining the lore of this world of vampires. That it's like it came at you like, I guess you were saying, John. I'm unfamiliar with this writer's other work, so this is coming at you real quick. You know, it's like all of a sudden we're going from a bloodbath of Killadelphia being just overrun to, oh, and here's the magic book that's the source of all the vampires that the kid has figured out that
Right.
John Adams hasn't been able to figure out for these 200 years. Or
Well, and I
whatever.
think to that point, I think it's ultimately an issue that is far more plot heavy and is full of devices versus the other issues, which I think are very character heavy and very focused on emotional drama between characters. And in that way, this issue does feel a little off.
Yeah.
And I can totally get the fact that it would play on disappointing your suspension of disbelief, because now it's like, all right, I bought into the founding father stuff. I bought into the vampires. I bought into the revolution stuff. Now you want me to throw magic? Like, at what point do I like, okay, wait, this is too much.
Right.
It's too much for my suspension of disbelief. So I totally get that, because it is clearly a plot device that is going to allow an imbalance between the good and evil characters in the story. And now there's a tool to rectify some of the wrongs that are going on here. So I get it. It is very plot heavy and does feel forced in some ways.
Yeah.
But I did like the buildup of the Brittany character and her sister, and like, you know, the explanation of like how their parents were sold and all this stuff. I thought that was interesting. And it's always interesting when you come across like vampires in the modern day that have been around for a long time, you know, and it's like they have a lot of history. Like honestly, if this was all over and they wanted to go back and do a John Adams story in the Civil War, I would be down for that story, you know, so that was interesting just to see. It's like, even it's always weird because it's like they're dressed modern, you know, but it's like, no, they've been around for a long time. So I liked all that stuff. I did. And then they brought the singster in too. That was, it's like that. And here's something that I thought at this point, I was already liking the art a lot, but one thing this artist is good at, all the men are basically dressed the same. They're all wearing business suits. They're mostly all black men, but they are all very distinctly recognizable individually. You know, we don't have like the Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne always looking the same issue going on here. Like you can tell them all apart.
When you give Senior the yellow eyes, it allows just a little difference between son
and his skin is a little more gray too. And his hair is gray. His hair is gray.
And it's thinner. Yeah.
Yeah. As the book went on, I felt like they did a better job of separating the two of them.
Right.
As opposed to those first couple of pages where it was confusing.
Yeah, well, that was because you missed the 10 years thing.
They're going
to keep taking shots at you for that.
Yeah,
the 10 years. But once you're into it, and like the father and the son, even when they're on the same page, they look like a father and son, but one of them definitely looks older, and he has yellow eyes.
Oh, he has yellow eyes.
I mean, but at that point, you can really tell them apart, even though they're both wearing a white shirt with a black tie.
No.
You know, I guess the son often wears a jacket, but
he also has a blue tie in some of the band sometimes. But they're very similar. Like they're all very similarly dressed for sure.
Right.
Justin, what about you? Is there anything jumps out about you about this issue?
So one thing with the magic, I would say that this at least kind of explains a little bit more in terms of like Tevin being able to kind of question his leader because he has this power in his back pocket of like, just having power.
It's power of knowledge, right?
So like he's starting to question everything, and who knows what else he read just from this book, but other than the gaining of the powers or whatever. But yeah, for him to just start questioning things, I feel like that kind of also backs up kind of some of the explanation of like why he challenged John to begin with. One part I wanted to point out was what the lieutenant. They get the lieutenant on board. They bring him in, and when they first, I love the lead up where they're showing like them walking into the door. He's like, "All right, like you sure? You're ready for this change?" And like when he comes in, and he's like, "What does he say?" He says, "What the blue F sangster?" And he just like pulls his gun out, and he's freaking out. The one thing I felt they missed was in the second issue, and I meant to add this, was when Josie got to see that he was alive again. They didn't really show that other than
her shock.
They didn't show the shock part. And I wish they did, because I feel like that's what I wanted was more of this. Because like think about if especially someone's dead, like if they're sitting up drinking what looks to be wine or whatever in your living room, and you're just gonna be blown away. I would just love to see like Josie's reaction. But anyway, so I like that part of the story, them getting Lieutenant involved. Obviously they need him now because they need somebody to help spread out or someone that has control of the fire department, the police department, so that they can start to plan out how they're going to stop all these stop all these other locations. So I like that kind of brought some of that stuff together. But anyways, just a couple fillers. And to what you said before, JP, I forgot as I was scrolling through more later how crazy Brittany went off after her sister decided that she didn't want to go through, and seeing some of these action scenes go off. Even like beforehand, just seeing this shot here with
Oh my
the
God.
with the cops.
And the little heart shirt, right?
Yes,
heart
yeah, like so good.
Yeah.
So no, those are some big moments.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they really
Um,
transform when they like are in attack mode. It's like their fingers get long and sharp.
Yeah,
and their
their
face
teeth
like
come out.
changes.
Yep, it's true.
Okay. I don't know, John. Was there anything in issue 5 that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I mean, the function is explaining what knowledge has done to Tevin and why he's not happy with either side in this drama, right? Why he doesn't agree with the way humans have basically wasted the opportunities of our nation. The way he feels like the modern generation is not living up to the expectations of the founders, versus looking at the founders and saying the foundation you laid may have been pretty imperfect and created a lot of the cracks that have. So he doesn't know where to lay blame, but he knows that nobody is doing it right. Yeah. And he knows that he has the power to impact change, but doesn't know necessarily how to utilize it. And that's an element of his immaturity, I guess you could say. Because the next issue 6 starts right off with him basically saying like, yeah, I can tap into this power. And I haven't done it, but Toppy, you're cutting down, buddy.
But here's like he clearly, because he has this book, is super overconfident in this issue.
Yeah.
And like, cause he like basically stops him, Toppy and this gang of vampires, he stops them and he just leaves them. And even Sangster's like, shouldn't we finish the job? And he's like, nah, it'll be fine. Like that's not going to come back to bite you in the what later.
I think he's not willing to kill necessarily for it. He even says to him, when the sun comes up and he's burning slow, he'll realize how dirty he did Philly. He's counting on the morality of people to rise above their circumstance. And I don't know that. I think that's a very naive take. It's a very naive for a character who's been alive for decades like he has. It's impressively naive, but I think at the same time, he's just also not the killer that the vampires want him to be. But
like he's part of a plan to go burn out a whole bunch of them all over town, like burn all these covens and that they're talking about. So it's just funny. Like there's just part of where I feel like there's a little inconsistency in him. Like their mission is to go kill a vampire, like, and then they're leaving. But yeah, and he even had made a comment earlier about, well, the one he should have feared wasn't Abigail, it was me. And it's like, I don't think that's right. So, yeah, issue 6, we get a lot of sun, and the cops are going to try to take out as many vampires as they can. But we see, like, Abigail basically, even before the fight with John, and Abigail takes out the mayor, and she's clearly working against him.
I love it, man. She's the villain, man, for me early in these stories.
Yeah,
and makes no.
She has her own plan.
Yeah. She's playing her own game, and I absolutely love it.
So, but then we see Tevin and Sangster taking on Adams, and we see that even though he couldn't decipher the book, Adams has powers and abilities too that they're not quite ready for.
Which Tevin does point that out, because he said the fear that he had was he doesn't know how much John Adams knows.
Yeah,
he never tested him enough to know what types of powers he has, and that I think is also partially why he didn't go all showing off what he had or putting that out there yet. But it was kind of like two Jedi going at it at the end there.
And we see that, Tevin's kind of losing, but because he had backup, we get this great.
Oh, yeah, that was great. Yep.
Which I find interesting. And then the conversation between Tevin and Adams.
Even this one, too.
Is, very much Tevin being, as John talked about, naive in terms of not realizing. He's like, you don't know what you've let off the leash. It's because, which we see later when she comes across him, it's like, oh, too bad.
Yeah, she didn't even blink.
Yeah.
She didn't even blink.
So what did you think about the showdown with Adams and all of that? And we'll let John go first this time because I think it's his turn.
I mean, Adams was never the big bad, right? And I think that even when we first see him, he has this aura of power, but he's clearly somebody who is so wrapped up in his own baggage, he's not able to be either the hero or the villain. He's just a cog in the wheel. And you could blame, I mean, in real life, he was a guy who didn't have slaves, didn't believe in slavery, but felt he couldn't do anything about it. Felt like it wasn't the era or the time to push that button, and that he was saddled with being the vice president to a man who was incredibly wealthy and had tons of slaves, and had to follow that guy up. And I think he throughout this story, we're seeing somebody who's unwilling to own his complicit nature in that, right? And so here we see him having to deal with it. He's killed, and we have his wife basically being, oh well, oh dear, again, you've blown it again.
I love it. She's like, I think it's safe to say you were wrong, John.
Right. And I think the battle is very interesting, but I think it's forcing John to realize, his ego had gotten in the way of truly doing something meaningful for his society.
And I think she knew this whole time that was going to kind of be how he was
totally
going to end.
Totally.
It was more about just waiting it out.
Game, right, with her own assistant and taking out the mayor on her own, so that she was waiting for him to flop so that she could prove I can do it on my own, right?
Yeah, like this guy's an idiot,
Those too many big words, old wolf. Sorry about that. I think you've been drinking, buddy. Maybe time to go to bed. It's almost midnight. You should go to bed.
Daryl, what do you think of the death of Adams? We'll see, and Abigail's response, and just that whole sequence there.
I liked it because you were already getting the sense of it, like John said. They initially set you up like John Adams is the big bad, but really, I guess like in life, Abigail was the one kind of running things in the background. Although it seems like she kind of just had like her alternate thing going. She was letting him do his thing and fail just so she could just kind of step in, you know? And I do like she just like take his remains to his tomb. So is he dead, John?
I don't know.
He looks pretty dead.
I want to share my bookmark. We'll read your comics, Daryl. I got my Daryl bookmark here.
Nice.
There you go.
Yeah. And my Daryl sticker. I got to put it on my folios.
Last thing is the end of this volume and the end of this issue is the father and son kind of reconciling, and which I think their reconciliation is well done.
Mm-hmm.
But explain to me, why the father suddenly thinks that the job is done because they killed Adams and a few of the vampires. He doesn't strike me as that kind of guy because he clearly knows there's more. And B, he crawls back into his coffin as a vampire to like just be in a coffin forever? Like, what? Someone explain this to me.
I found that odd too. Like you said,
he's done. If he feels like his mission, his case is closed and he's done, why doesn't he have his son end it so he's not a vampire? No, put me in the coffin, son, and I'm just going to be conscious in this coffin for eternity.
Hey, Tevin's still around. Have Tevin turn you back into a regular person.
Right? So, John, you're reacting to it. I'll let you, like, is that not strike you as odd as all get out?
It is an odd choice. And I think it's hard to explain it without getting into what happens to him in the next bit.
Right. I get it. I get that it was, we're going to keep him around. Like that, but why have him crawl back in? If they're going to keep him around, why have him crawl back into the coffin? Like,
it's a great question. No, it's a great question. For me, I took it as a guy who, unlike John Adams, could realize his foibles and his flaws and was happy that he'd finally at least found a way to communicate with his son and to finish off a last big case as a detective and was ready to move on. But suicide was not the option for him. And so instead it was like, I had experienced whatever it was in the grave. And we never see what he went through between being dug up and being dying, right?
Yeah.
We never saw what that was. But whatever he had experienced, it was the next step, and he was going to go back to it.
Okay, Justin.
That's a good way to put it, John. That's a good way to put it.
This is why I do shows with Justin. He just says he likes what I say.
I feel like no, because you're tiptoeing around stuff, and you have to
because there's some big issues coming up.
Yeah,
here
like I feel like this series as a whole needs to be read straight through.
Well, it's just like what I will say. That's what we're. I think it's better this way than in single issues. Which I will admit, I've stopped buying single issues of this book.
Same. Yeah.
At a given point, when I realized they were going to do these amazing hardcovers, it's been a while since I bought a single issue of this book, and I was buying double covers for a while, and I think I've just realized how much more I enjoy it as an entire series.
Yep. Yeah.
Fuck you, old wolf. Jesus Christ, man. I tried not to say it, and then you're going to say it? God damn you, old wolf. Damn you. I told you you've been drinking.
What he's saying doesn't make sense because he's still just in his coffin as a vampire.
It is. Yeah, no, it's definitely odd, JP.
Yeah. Okay, Daryl, what did you think?
I just want to add though.
Let Justin talk, man.
No, I do think that this is really well done. The father-son part, like them hugging it out.
I would agree with that.
Saying goodbye at the end. Yeah, I thought that was really done. Really well done. I'm glad. I was waiting for that. I'm sorry. That ultimately, and to get that in a big, a main one, full page. Or whatever. I thought that was well timed. So anyways, go on, Daryl. Yeah, it's hard to you don't want to spoil extra stuff.
I mean, there's not too much extra to say. Like the father-son dynamic that was established in the first issue is resolved in a satisfying way at the end of the 6th issue or the end of this first book. But yes, I agree. It was like, so he's just going to go back in the coffin and okay, all right. I guess that's how it's going to go. I guess if they need him again, they can dig him back up.
Well, that's clearly what it is. It's like, oh, we're just going to dig him back up later. But it's like at some point, but why put him in the ground to begin with? It was just so, I don't know. It struck me as super weird.
It is. It is. It totally is. I don't disagree.
You're not.
So it was one of the narrative things that happened. That there was just a few of them throughout the whole thing that took me out of the book, and that was one that took me out of the book. Like I'm enjoying the story, and then I think it's a suspension of disbelief thing, kind of like what Daryl mentioned earlier when it was like a ton of exposition. And I totally get it. And you're not wrong. There's nothing wrong about what you're saying. And I don't necessarily think what you get later totally justifies it, but it does, at least within the context of the narrative, try to explain it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Final thoughts. First volume of Killadephia. Daryl, I'll let you go first before these two that have read way ahead. Your final thoughts.
Kind of what I said at the beginning. I love the art and I love the concept. Hashing it out to talk about it more makes me enjoy it more, I think, than I did when I read it. Not that I didn't like it, but just the pacing was a bit hectic at parts. Aside from the father-son thing, I thought some of the relationships didn't flow very well in the story. But the more and John Adams' plan was just, it wasn't very clear, but talking about it and adding the perspective
and intrinsically flawed
in there really kind of was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense as to why it waited. So that, I did enjoy it, and I do want to read the second book that's available, this second trade, I guess. I don't know. Are you wanting to give a rating on it?
You can if you want. That's we don't always, but you can if you want.
That's our show. It's not his show.
Okay.
Can you give a rating?
I'm the X-Men, man. Come on.
All right. If we do a 10, I would give it a solid. I want to say just 7, but I really did like the art in it a lot.
Yeah.
So that may elevate it up to more closer to an 8.
Okay. Justin, what about you? Final thoughts on this first volume?
Yeah, I will keep it short. I think ultimately I would just encourage anyone to continue reading. Just read more. Just give it a shot overall as a series. Obviously, I assume that'll be the plan for us in this grouping. One thing too to note, if you get a chance, and I don't know if I assume that the hardcover or even the trade has it, but look in the back at past the thumbnails, or sorry, the yeah, I guess they're called like the thumbnails of the covers, and you'll see this breakdown of. Did you read some of this? I thought it was so cool to hear Sean Alexander talk about the actors that he paid to like sketch and work off of to get the designs as realistic as possible. And even having, where was the one with the guy in the cow, like him like lifting in this one scene and just having him in the suit to get the exact parts of like how a suit would lay out. And then him bending over the couch here to act as like the dead guy that he's lifting. I just thought that all that was like such a cool, like behind the scenes aspect of it. So between
process stuff.
Yeah. Like I thought that was really neat, really worth reading. And then the other part too is, Ronnie Barnes explaining more on how he came up with this concept and how he literally saw Hamilton. I think he said by the sixth time he saw Hamilton was like, okay, like I'm going to work on this book now. Like he already had things in mind, but this was like, that was like stuff that kind of pushed him over the edge with like his idea and concept of everything that he had for this. So, there's a story behind the story, and I think it's really interesting. So if you guys check that out, or I know John and Dan from Comic Chop News both interviewed Ronnie Barnes probably several times, right, Jenny? I think you streamed it. Yeah, that's why. So like, there's other really cool stories and stuff that Ronnie has shared on those streams too. So if you guys get a chance, check that stuff out. But yeah,
cover, John.
I love this one. Oh no, yeah, I did not get that one.
Any sexy Abigail Adams cover, I'm buying it. This is a phenomenal actual cover. The back cover is just really a great. Is it a Frizen? I can't remember. It's amazing. Also in the back they have Elysium Gardens, which every issue of Killadelphia had like a little 3-page, 4-page issue of this werewolf story included at the back. They separated them out in the hardcover, so they're all in one.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that.
I didn't. It was a little bit like do I want to read it this week or not? Do I want to read all those later on? Kind of a thing. But I think it's better in the hardcover when they're all together as one werewolf story, and you can just read it separately.
So is it part of this like world?
I mean, I suppose you could consider it part of this world. I don't know that they necessarily say it's definitely, but certainly there's crossover stuff.
Okay. All right, John, your final thoughts on Volume 1.
I think this book is at its best when it's focusing on the characters, and that's when I love it the most. I think when it gets into plot, I feel like I love it a little bit less. But the art is so phenomenal, and the concepts are so interesting, and the Americana and social discussions that are happening are so poignant that it overrides any qualms I might have about the speed and pacing or the some of the forced plot elements. Maybe for me, it's just deeply interesting, and I find that the true horror is not the graphic violence, but instead the realities of the impact of slavery on our nation to today. Like you can't ignore it. It's not something that you can bury your head in the sand and just ignore. It's going to constantly have impacts. Even the discussion that they even have in this series about setting slaves free didn't just solve it made other problems. It was a good decision, but it made other problems. How do you enable these people then to be successful and not just be vagabonds for the rest of their lives? They have nothing, and all you do is unleash them on the world. Promise them 30 acres and a mule, but did we actually simply give them anything to get them started? Nothing. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting discussion around this legacy done through a horror comic. What an interesting concept. Like, you can dive into these big issues through the medium of a very pulpy genre and a comic book.
Yeah.
So basically you're saying this would not be allowed in Florida public I had to go.
Home run from Daryl in the final at bat.
For me, final thoughts on this. because we're way long, but I think it's super intriguing. Is a horror comic. I'm not a huge horror fan. So a lot of the pulpy horror stuff, it's like, okay, it's fine. It doesn't that doesn't necessarily pull me in. I will say it's like like you said, the concepts, the characters themselves are really intriguing. There's some really high highs in this volume, but I feel like it's inconsistent in pacing and in some of the storytelling beats and in some of the decisions like that I can't I don't love it. It's good. I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to hopefully volume 2 builds on this because I think there's a really solid foundation here. But yeah, I mean it was good, but that's kind of it was good. That's kind of how I feel at the moment. You guys definitely helped with a few of the things today, which always happens. Like as you talk about stuff and you hear other concepts, and it helps bring some things home that I feel like I missed. I do think I like it more at the moment than I did when I finished reading it the other night.
I will say it's the same thing happened for me reading East of West and then going back and watching your shows. I think it had a huge impact on my enjoyment and understanding of that series. And I would highly recommend to the people who watch your indie shows, if you pick up a book, say Deadly Class or whatever that you haven't read before, and you read a volume and you just want to be engaging in that discussion, and it maybe drove JP crazy or maybe he loved it, but each time I finished a volume, I'd dive back in and I'd put it on speed. I'd put it on double speed. But I would watch each one of his indie show discussions and then leave comments to Kavi and to Bear Island and to JP just because I wanted to be able to engage with that material with them because I couldn't do it live because I was way behind the series. I think it's kind of fun that you do this because it anytime anybody reads Killadelphia, they can come back and watch this and then engage in it.
Yeah. So no, it is. I don't want to undersell it, because I'm probably it's good, but because I did enjoy it. There is a little bit for me. There's probably a cap, just like the gore horror stuff. It kind of puts a cap on it just for me, just in general, because that's just not my thing.
My dad had the same reaction because he's like, I can't believe of all the books I've talked about on my Saturday morning comics show, he picked Killadephia as the one to try to read. And I was like, I get it. You like Hamilton and American history, but it's a horror comic, Dad. It's a horror.
So that puts a cap on it, but I do think there's a little bit holding it back for me. I think if he tightens up some of the things that were bothering me in this first volume going forward, then I think it could really leap up in how I feel about it. But we'll see. So with that, we're over an hour and a half, so we're gonna get out of here. It's late. Thank you, Tony, for holding out with us. I don't know how many. He probably killed a bottle while he was watching.
He's been texting me the whole time. He's trying to do his Legos. He's trying to rebuild the Legos we bought.
Nice.
Right. Sleepy Reader, thank you. And with that, we're gonna get out of here. So later, everybody. See you next time.